All right, I think we're rolling here. We rolling? Okay. Welcome everyone. Welcome back to the afternoon panel, The Queer Subjective, Everywhere You Go, There You Are, with Shmee Giarratana, who I'm really happy to have here today. I think I'm going to embarrass Shmee for a second here, if that's okay. Um, but in any case, if you're in the morning sessions, we had a wonderful morning, but I'll introduce myself again. My name is Charlie Forbes. I'm the program coordinator for the Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion program here at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Um, One of the reasons I'm so excited to have Shmee here is Shmee once held my position. There's a bit of a lineage here, so which I mention in the instance, and I do this. I just want to pay homage and pay respect, kind of to the lineage of thought here, where a lot of the conceptualization around this summit started with Shmee. It's been my job to kind of bring it to fruition and turn it into what it is today. But it really started with Shmee and the genesis of the idea. Um, and Shmee also had the very difficult task of running the 2021 summit in through COVID, the theme of Indigenous lifeways and ecology. But so I mentioned that, there's been a lineage of thought, but also kind of a legacy of form here that I've sort of inherited in terms of this online form of the summit. Um, but I'm just grateful, to Shmee of this theme of queer ecologies and religions. Um, it's such a fascinating topic with many different entry points. A timely topic, but certainly in an interdisciplinary field, that being religion and ecology, it's important to have different avenues in to these topics. So um, I've been grateful to Shmee. Shmee is someone who I think of very highly professionally, but also personally. We've known each other for a number of years now. And I've felt that relate as we've been growing professionally, I think our relationship has also been deepening as well. So I'm just very glad and happy to bring Shmee into this space with our some of our shared interests, which is around film. Um, so I'm gonna read a bio and then I'll pass it over to you, Shmee, um, who who, by the way, I didn't mention is the director of student success now currently at CIIS, which falls under the academic division of student affairs. So um, yeah, but I'll let you introduce the panel and the theme, but I think I'll just read your bio. So Shmee Giarratana is a queer intermedia artist, storyteller, educator, and mentor whose work is driven by a commitment to creative emergence. Shmee's passion for storytelling spans from personal narrative to cultural mythology and fosters a commitment to the myriad tales of our time. Honoring story as a path into relationship, Shmee's projects connect self-discovery to meaning making with the web of life. In collaboration with nonprofit and community arts centers, Shmee offers art-based programs grounded in mindfulness, embodiment, ritual, and creative play for self-inquiry, story weaving, and community building. With a BA in film studies and an MA in depth psychology, Shmee supports higher ed through curriculum development as adjunct professor, teaching artist, and administrator at the California Institute of Integral Studies and the Hollos Institute. So Shmee, I'm going to turn the session over to you here, and you can maybe talk us through the format and the structure of this community panel. But thank you very much. I express my gratitude having you here today and look forward to the community session here.
Thank you so much, Charlie. This is really such a special introduction. Truly a warm welcome. My heart is full to be so received by you and by this Queer Ecology Summit. It's so exciting to see this come to life as a ever emerging queer identified person and recognizing that as such a core part of my own spiritual practice and continuous discovery of how to return to myself and return to the sacred and how I show up in life. I personally hold queerness as my spiritual practice, queer mysticism. And so, in this context of religion, spirituality, and ecology, queerness for me just holds it all together. And it's such an honor and a gift to have this platform and be able to come together in community today to explore this, and using one of our, you know, like wide and largely used tools of a map, to see how that is a key into opening up new orientations and relationships with place, and also finding our own position and locality in that. And so through that way, cultivating belonging, first within ourselves and how we belong ourselves to Earth, and then also belonging through bridge building, in relationship with others. Queerness is so liberatory for me, and I recognize that the presence of queerness in a lot of different worldviews and practices, is often contested. And so much of my own belonging of myself to Earth and to Earth's communities, is really reclaiming this as my sacred birthright. So thank you all so much for tuning in today. The structure of the panel or of this conversation, I'd say, we are all the panelists together. There'll be opportunities to hear from one another, to bring your voice into the space and ground into this topic through your own experiences. I know even with how often I depend on like a Google or Apple Maps, no sponsorship here, but how often I depend on those things and identify as a little blue dot moving through a digital space. That really dislocates me from how I find my way even in my most local environments. So it's something I'm always trying to check myself on and allow myself to be confronted by, so that I can continue to break out, of these helpful tools, but these systems that are imposed, the perspectives, that are centralized, and kind of held as an overstory, for the ways that I operate and belong myself to place. So even if you're not as a cartographer, even if you don't identify as queer, this is definitely a place where your perspective and contributions are welcome in the conversation. We're going to look at some materials from other counter mapping strategies that have really inspired me. And then I'm also going to share a bit about a project that I've coined, through the field of narrative cartography. Narrative cartography looks at stories and maps and the relationships that are naturally embedded there. And so the workbook that I created as a part of my master's project when I was studying depth psychology is what I called a wayfinding workbook. So there are many prompts, to guide the participant through introspective inquiry, tracking internally, remembering dreams and bringing the dreams into the landscape, and also, of course, noticing, what's happening, through the body's awareness, through the body's sensory system, what you're noticing, happening around you through the many subjectives that we're co-creating with all the time. So it's, again, such a joy to be here with you all. And while Charlie so graciously named me in the lineage, there are so many in the lineage of this work, and all of our work together and all of our play and rest together, so many that remain unnamed. So at this moment, I'd like to invite us into a pause, invite myself back into my breath. I can get so excited, especially on these geek out topics for me. It's good to remember some pace, to orient a little bit, especially if you're joining this as the second session for today, or other ways that you're engaging online. It's a lot of computer time. So with this breath that's always with us, whether or not we're aware of it, with this breath, invite you to join me in just orienting to the physical space. Whether using a focused gaze, a soft gaze, or an inner vision, connect with what you see. Perhaps naming to yourself or saying out loud the colors that stand out to you. And then shifting your awareness towards the soundscape. You may name the sounds that you notice, or it may be a mismatch of different stimulation in the environment near and far. Or you may prefer to keep it all unnamed. Let it all blend together in a symphony of white noise and the sound of impact. And with this breath, you may notice, some senses through the sense of smell or a sensory experience of taste. As the inhale and exhale moves through your nose and your mouth, just notice the qualities of being through the perspective of these senses. And in through the doorways of your mouth, your nostrils, your nasal passageways. The breath is going to fill your lungs and the connective diaphragms in your body. Perhaps bringing your interest, your curiosity, your awareness, the weight of gravity that connects you to the ground beneath your feet, and any object that you're resting into. Perhaps a living companion that you're resting into or that's resting into you. And I invite you just to bring in some gratitude to this groundedness, into this contact, into this connection, into this flowing awareness. This gratitude is to you and to all that empowers our presence here today. There are countless others who are a part of this moment, who are a part of this event through their labor and their effort and their resource, all making it possible that we gather here today. So I invite you to join me in extending that gratitude out into this space that holds us physically, into this virtual space, bringing in care for each of our interconnections, including all of those who've come before us, those that we know, those that we don't know, and in that honoring the complexities of each of our histories, acknowledging how it's all carried forward into today. And this brings me to one of the first countermapping strategies of our call, which is a website called Native Land Digital. And this resource can help you locate yourself and discover the names of the indigenous people who are the caregivers, who are the ancestors of the place where you reside, of the lands that raised you, the community garden plot that you connect with every week, the drive to Target. Yes, even there. And this is just one way that we can be in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of the lands by doing our part to honor the shared histories. And it's just the first step towards righting the wrongs of the past together. So whether you check out this link right now while we're in this spacious moment together, or you come back to it at a later time, it's a place where you can, type in your address, identify a current name of a city, and then uncover the history of the lands here. And what makes this, I'm looking at it over at my other screen, so pardon my split attention. But what makes this a counter map is that it's offering another way of seeing and being with place that is beyond the dominant or the overstory of the dominant culture and the structures that hold and shape our systems. My great grandfather always noticed that there's everything in a map, how to fold it. But I have found that I can challenge that because there isn't everything in a map. If you think about, digital maps definitely give us an opportunity for a more expansive view, but there still is limited data there. There are limited perspectives that are informing it. And then if you think about, a folded map, which is what he was referencing in that cheeky joke, whether or not it's funny, no, it's his joke. What he noticed in those folded maps, there still are four corners, there's still an edge that we're working within. And beyond that, it's all through the perspective of the cartographer. We tend to consider maps to be an objective, and wherever we hold objectivity, I tend to think that it's an exaggeration of one perspective, of one or of several subjectives coming together. So I consider it a false objectivity. When we think that there is one map that tells the story of a place, and this is how we together can orient to relating to a place. Um, I discovered that in when maps of what we now know as the Western United States, when those maps were first created, there were a lot of different cartographers on the scene, and so a common practice was for a cartographer to make up a town and place it on the map almost as their signature, so that if the map was replicated, it could always be traced back to them. And that, creative liberty, an act of creating, making up a town just to find your signature on a map of a place, I think kind of tells me all that I need to know about the power that is held by those who are creating the maps. And so counter mapping strategies are a way to bring in different narratives, to be explicit about the subjective experience that is being centered on a map. And what I hope is that it's an opportunity to invite us all to be participants in map making and orienting to the places where we spend our time. So that, is a big part of the question that I present in the description of our time together. Who writes the map? Um, as these, as we all are engaging in place together, whose map are we following? When we're going from here to the community garden, or from here to the Target, or to campus, or to work, or wherever it is that we're moving in our days. Who's dictating the path that I take? And if it wasn't for that, that automated digital map guiding me, how else would I be finding my way? It's this skill that I think is really lost in my day-to-day life. I really depend on other material on these, false objective maps to get me from point A to point B, or even longer journeys at times. But what would be guiding me if it wasn't for that? And what am I losing in not being able to rely on my own perspective and trust my own wayfinding capacities to maneuver through the world? I personally think that it's really connected to feelings of isolation and alienation and a disconnection from belonging. If I can't acknowledge where my feet are planted or where my body is moving through space, if I can't recognize the other species that I'm living with, even if they're in, a plot surrounded by concrete and asphalt, who is that? Who's living there? What life is possible there? So I think that as we move away from depending on the maps of others and open into our own perspectives through map making, there's so much relationality that becomes available there. And it stretches backwards and forwards in time. So now that we're kind of dropping into the topic a little bit, and I've shared with you this native lands map, this digital map online. I want to ask my friend Charlie to pull up a video that I've also pulled, which has furthered my understanding of counter mapping. I don't know if any of you all are familiar with Emergence magazine, but some years ago, they connected with Jim Anote, who's a traditional Zuni farmer and the director of the Ashiwi Awan Museum and Heritage Center. And this was a little bit into my research on counter mapping and what was underlying my own practices of narrative cartography. And I found that the perspective he shares in this film, it's a short 10-minute mini documentary. I found that these perspectives really reflected so much of what I was noticing in my own like rediscovery and reorientation with place to help inform that a little bit of my own position in it all. I am a third generation settler here on this land where I live. And so I have experienced a lot of disconnection from the places where my ancestors lived, and then all that's lost in the displacement of immigration. And so I found that in order to even connect with my roots, it was really important for me to orient to the lands, the places, and the species with which I cohabitate every day. And so this helped me orient to not only the many ways of seeing and relating with place that were available to me, that are available to us all, but also how much of that is lost when we rely on the maps of others. So I'm also going to add the link to this video in the chat in case anyone has connection issues with the Zoom. I know there can sometimes be a lag in the presentation. So that way you can stay at pace with us if you want to open it in a separate browser.
Yeah, and Shmee, please do let me know if there's any lagging or anything like that. We all don't need to be sitting through a video that's lagging, so just speak
Okay,
up.
great.
Okay.
Okay, great. And same for everyone here. Please keep us updated in the chat. There are several of us around, so we'll all be keeping an eye on your comments here. All right,
Okay.
take it away, Charlie.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right, perfect.
We live in a world with many ways of knowing, with many different systems of knowledge. Knowledge that Zuni people have about the landscape has been underestimated, hasn't been clearly understood. It's time to assert that we have the knowledge of place and challenge the idea of what maps are about. Now I'm Charlie. You're coming back. You got eaten up by rabbits, but you're making it. Oh, there's ears even. I've been planting 60 consecutive years, ever since I was in a cradle board. My grandmas and aunties put seeds in my hands, and then they put me over a hole Planted it. Next year I planted, the next year, next year, next year. Everywhere I live, I always planted something. Most of it here. Zuni is a place where most people live within 2 minutes of every living relative and dead relative. I think knowing where you're from is important. What other people call you is what really makes you of this place. First, some of them know me as a farmer. Some of them don't even know I'm a museum director. My name is Jim Enote, and I'm the director of the Ashweawan Museum here in Zuni, New Mexico. There's my field right there. And I can see the corn is dead and dry. It's kind of creepy to look down on. It's disorienting. One time I showed my mother some aerial photos. Her first response was, I'm not a bird. She says, that's not how I look at things. She asked me, what am I looking at? I don't know what I'm looking at. Maps have done a lot to confuse things for people. And I think more lands have been lost to native peoples, probably through mapping than through physical conflict. I wanted to make some maps that were both elegant, evocative, and profoundly important to the Zuni people. And that's where the map art idea came from. These were at American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Of course, it's going to be one of the last ones. I had no idea at the beginning that so much story would come out of this map making process. At first, I thought we would create some new kinds of maps that counter and challenge the notion of what maps are, where north does not have to be at the top, that scale is unnecessary. What's more important is these stories of the history described in these vignettes of experience. And now these are here for all Zunis to learn from here on. These maps become a thing that helps a family or a group to start speaking about places, to start learning from each other and talking about places in a way that's uniquely Zuni. If we were to go outside our doors now and walk downstream from the Zuni River, it would take us right back into the Grand Canyon. It's like an umbilical cord connecting us back to the place that we came out from Mother Earth. When I come to this place, it's like a special place on the bookshelf library, our cultures library. Well, today we take pictures, sometimes selfies of ourselves, and our ancestors were marking on the rocks here, things that they saw, like turkeys and deer. And there's stuff all over. You can see things, zigzags, hash marks. It's a fish. That's a really rare one. Religious leaders began to see petroglyphs here that are the same as those in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. A certain clan symbol, a certain way of making a spiral. It has a Zuni signature. That helps us to connect these dots and bring the whole story together. We limit ourselves if we think of maps as only two-dimensional. The map may be something we heard from our grandmother about a place. There are maps in songs and in prayers. There are maps that are etched in stone and woven into textiles and painted on ceramics. Google Maps and any other kinds of maps really, while they're very helpful, the names around here are in English or Spanish. And so they completely leave off the meaning of the place. It is replacing our language and eclipsing our language and knowledge with something different, something that's not really from here. This whole constellation of what makes up a map to me has always been far beyond a piece of paper. Imagine ancestors traveling for days, looking for water, being parched, thirsty. Imagine coming to this valley and finding this. And they said, this is where we'll stay. When you grow old with a community and all of their great grandmothers are from this place, that carries a kind of identity and profoundness that you can't find anywhere else. When people have a map that is part of affirming their identity, it tells them that they are of this place. I feel part of something with this work. If my grandpa and grandma would see the Zuni maps, I think they would have recognized quickly, oh yeah, this is what's in that song. This is what's in those prayers. And I think as their descendants, they would have been proud. A lot of things that our grandparents tell us and pass down to us, they always say, remember these things, remember it. And too often things are forgotten, but I think the map art is going to be something where they'll say, you remembered.
Thank you, Charlie. And thank you, Jimmy Note, for sharing what body of work that really touches me. And I'm really interested to hear how it's landing with you all out there. So I want to open up the floor a bit for some conversation. You can put some thoughts in the chat or unmute yourself. Maybe just sharing what stood out to you or how you feel right now after receiving it. Yeah, Robin, hi.
Hi. Well, I was deeply moved by it, of course, and at the same time, I kept thinking about where I grew up, which is very different, and the land that I wish I had. It's now a subdivision. It was a tree farm, 50 acres of trees and forest in Michigan, and now it's a subdivision. So I don't know, and I haven't been back for quite a while, but it made me want to go back.
Mm.
And just wander and take note and feel and listen and smell the reality of that place,
Mm.
of that land.
Mm. It sounds like a potent reunion, Robin.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think for the first time more recently in my life, I actually you're right, reunion is right. And it's reunion, I'm sure there must be a few trees left there that were there when I was there. And I would love to be able to greet them and be greeted by them, and um, so on and so forth. All the beings, all the kin.
Mhm. Yeah, the act of remembering together,
Yes,
and honoring that shared experience that continues even when there's great change.
yes. It also, I won't take more time. I just want to say, it also, I'm now living in a relatively suburban urban community in northern New Jersey, near Newark in New York. And I've only lived here 2 years, but it makes me want to see what I can learn about this place, this land. So much covered with asphalt now and concrete, but there's
Mhm.
still land here.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and such history that
yes, it's history.
the asphalt can erase and that the maps can change our perspective on.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I wish you well
thank
in
you.
getting yourself differently acquainted with where you are now.
Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you.
Maybe you'll make some maps of it too, that are
Maybe.
uniquely of your perspective.
Yeah.
Mhm. I'm seeing some appreciation in the chat for what Jim says, how his mother commented on the like bird's eye view map. I'm not a bird. How much our perspective is integrated into the representations that we're looking at. I think we can often erase ourselves. That's a part of this. My theories of false objectivity is that we remove ourselves from things by saying that it's an objective point of view rather than honoring our path and position and perspective that we're holding to even see or comment on things. And I say it's my theory because it's coming from me, but there's likely a lot of other people who have spoken to that. And that can continue on in the chat, or Rachel, yeah, please.
Oh, maybe I'll just add on to what you just said about perspective. What landed for me was just the notion of scale, the comment he made about scale being not important in these
Mm,
maps. And I just felt like resistance in myself, like, oh,
mm,
well, I want to manage things and make sure they accurately represent relationships in a way that is scalable. But I just noticing that and saying, what would happen if I didn't think that way? It feels like a wonderful invitation.
right, those uncomfortable explorations, and I have resistances that arise in me too around some of these practices, and it's such a cool place to lean into. Especially thinking about the power that I'm holding with the maps I'm making. It's sort of low stakes. It's like, all right, maybe I'm reworking some things that I've internalized, but until I branch this out, and share it with others, these are my stories, these are my experiences. And sometimes I find that my memories in place can also distort the scale of things. I have a big experience emotionally, or if there's a big energy at, the peak of a hike or sitting with a tree, or, this juncture that I pass on, my daily routines, what significance does that begin to hold in my awareness and in my memory and in my connection with the place? Um, and this is after years of sketching classes where also, it's like, how big is the hand compared to the shoulder or the face? um, there's also a lot of liberties to take when we're working with different scales of things. Maybe less of a weight on the precision of things. I see Meg in the chat commenting that if my ancestors were able to see these maps, I'd like to think they would recognize these places from the songs and be proud of their descendants. I love that for, this sense of time travel, of moving beyond what's happening here and now and communicating backwards and forwards with the ways that we connect with place, whether the tools are songs and prayers or these maps and paintings. Any other reflections or responses to what's being shared here? this time watching, I was really struck by Jim noting that map is a part of your identity. So if we're working from this understanding that the cartographer is always the first mark on the map, it's inseparable. Our perspectives are inseparable from what we're creating. What about the I position within myself? Which identity or which seat of awareness am I relating through? And how can centering that particular experience, help this map become a vessel for that aspect of my life, that aspect of my experience coming through maps? And there are so many ways that we can organize a sense of identity. One that we might be familiar with, in this crowd is an ecological identity. But I'm not always approaching my ecology through an ecological identity. Sometimes I'm thinking about work when I'm on my way to work, and I'm not, sinking into the place in a way that is through that framework. I'm kind of in my operating mode of my professional identity or my work identity. So there are ways that we can center aspects of ourselves that aren't, otherwise, associated with ecology or with, our relationship to a place. And I'm curious, as a point of reflection and maybe to share into the group or just, keep for yourself for further consideration, which identities is a place where you all call forward in, or which are identities that are kind of eating at you in a particular way that you want to take to the altar of ecology? Speaking for myself personally, my queer identity had safety to emerge because of my time in more than human environments. To feel this resonant reflection, with how the creek was moving or just the different coloration of leaves on the forest floor in a particular season. There is something in that isn't, a gender or isn't a sexuality or isn't, an experience that we typically categorize as queerness. But the ways that I could sink into myself and feel like an essence of life moving through me and the expansiveness that I connected to in those states of awareness was like a healing balm for the ways that my queerness had met, an abrasive social system. And so the map through that identity for me looks a particular way when it's, navigating through a forest. We'll look at in a little bit some ways that folks have quote unquote queered the map by uplifting queer experiences around the globe and creating a virtual archive for connecting about those stories. And someone else is commenting in the chat to me, that the relationship between land, sex, gender, and wild flux of energy, that moves through time, the eros of nature, and where that does come through, in what can be called a queer experience. Are there any other identities that y'all are noticing or that are arising in you? These parts of yourself that you're touching into? If you have some suggestions for the direction of the conversation, but don't want to bring your voice in the space, you're welcome to send me a direct message in the chat and I'll anonymously share on your behalf and, feed our feast together. Yeah, Michelle.
I think studying Berry and swim, that for me, often I will walk the beach, for example, and imagine and give gratitude for the evolutionary unfolding that brings me the sun that's shining on me and things like that. And that's difficult so that cosmic identity that I
Mm.
have, that is difficult to see in a map. Although yesterday we were in the total zone for the total solar eclipse, and that was very much a relationship to that identity, my identity connected to my cosmic identity. And so anyway, I think it is difficult to see that sometimes in a traditional map or typical map that we've been raised with.
It's so true. It's so true. And the cosmology that holds us and that brings a perspective. That's a perspective of scale, all right. And in these points of consideration, as we relate to ourselves and to place and position and belonging and all these different things I've named, as we relate to that through different maps, we are invited to inhabit that position that the map is reflecting in us. So considering on a cosmic level, how is that then internalized, and informs the ways that we each move forward and make way through our lives. It becomes the context for the experiences that we're sharing and cultivating together. And still, a lot of the maps that we're talking about are, it's through ourselves, each of ourselves as the cartographer, kind of a single view coming through the maps that we're making. When in reality, we're existing in a concordance of perspectives and experiences. We're one among many subjectives. Even without the self-awareness, there still is wind that, the flower is leaning into. There still is that relationship in a way that we can step outside of, or imagine beyond each of our singular perspectives, and bring in a relationality of the narrative that we're holding together, bringing in that context. And it's tricky to find a way to do that without fully anthropomorphizing, the flower or the fox that crosses our path, or getting into realms of fantasy and mythos, of how they're moving about their day before our sacred encounter here in the forest. But there are things that we can notice about their experiences without stretching into our imaginations, looking at their tracks, recognizing the rhythms or the patterns of their lives, and even being with what arises in us whenever we are in that encounter, being with expanding the awareness into the fullness of what that experience might bring. So I'm going to share a bit more. Oh, I see Eve's hand. So before I pivot, I'd like to welcome Eve in. Yeah, please.
Hi. So this is like basically because you asked about like a community like feedback, and so currently like I have like basically some trauma that's basically healing but also being dealt with in my body somatically. So I want to basically acknowledge my positionality. I'm not an ecologist. Um, I'm a white settler, I'm queer, and I'm disabled. So one of the things about like the older Sunni community members, including the ones that had died, the thing that struck me is basically that they cared enough about the people coming after them. Because as a queer person, as a white settler, my family experience was not that at all. So, um, so that's the part that's like awkward for me to figure out how to talk about.
Mhm.
But so besides, the community building and stuff like that, I think the like the part that's more like accessible for me for like trying to figure out like how to artistically like talk about like the sort of like mapping thing is the accessibility type mapping. Like there's like an inadequacy of like, for example, like handicap basically centered paths for like mapping. And I also think about how like when kids are basically too small to like basically reach to a high shelf or to the doorknob, that height difference is considered a form of childproofing. And also I am from the Chicago metropolitan area on indigenous Potawatomi land, at least this region of the Three Fires Confederacy land. And so another idea that comes along is like how the bridges got lifted during the 2020 protests, like again, using that basically height differential as a way to contain people. So, so yes, I don't quite know what else to say, but it's nice to know that there are people who care about other people. And also another thing that was coming to mind is that in a college course I took, there's like this section about like indigenous Australians, stuff about like dream time and stuff. Then like having like the religion basically be a form of like survival guide, if if you want like add a fandom analysis to it, like as opposed to say like a canon about like something else, like that that was resonating so with the Sunni perspective. So okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eve. Thank you so much for these contributions to our conversation. I hear you and recognize the accessibility differences in relating with land in different ways, in access to places through gatekeeping, through barriers of violence and oppression, and also the invitation of mapping as a communication tool within a community that shares aliveness at the same time, and also in communicating with future generations or tapping into a history of a supportive lineage, kind of finding that through place are some of the things that came to mind for me um, in hearing what you shared. And I am interested to look into maps for different types of accessibility, because that is also something that is erased and lost in a lot of maps or trail guides or things like that, ways that people are expected to be engaging with place or engaging with ecology from a limited perspective of, the overculture that has access to those communication tools or that platform in the first place. So I'm really inspired by what you've shared, and would love to be in touch offline if there are any resources that you have to share with me to spearhead that or to connect further on the topic. Charlie, I see your hand.
Yeah, if it's okay, Shmee, I know you said you were going to pivot. I just have one thing I'd like to share. It's quite synchronous for me to be watching this film right now. I've actually come across the work of Jim Anote. I've been sort of really deep into Craig Childs's work right now. He's kind of a science writer, naturalist, based in the Southwest. His book, Tracing Time, Seasons of Rock Art on the Colorado Plateau, is where Jim is referenced quite a bit because he's studying rock art. So I just bring that up like for another touch point, but in another one of Craig's books, The Secret Knowledge of Water, he's actually sort of traveling through the desert, kind of mapping out water holes. What came to mind for me, of course, watching this film was when Jim approached the spring kind of oasis. I'm not sure what you would want to call it. But in conjunction with his point about the level of violence sort of occurred through mapping, even exceeding that um, of physical contact, to be an extraordinary statement. And I think that really sitting with me. I mean, one of the things that Craig talks about in this book is like, if you don't know how to map, you die in the desert. So there's quite literally like a relationship, a life and death relationship to our mapping, to the way in which we map, um, that really kind of drove the point home. And these stories around maybe like Jim says, oh, I could just imagine how thirsty maybe they were when they showed up. Sort of maybe referencing this moment of the story when they've been through the desert and they're at a breaking point, when the a focal point in that narrative becomes something that reinvigorates and brings life. Um, so anyway, I'm just bringing in another touch point, and then yeah, that's what really stood out to me as a tremendous comment of Jim's.
Thank you for that, Charlie. Yeah, that reminds me of touching into those histories and the utilization of wayfinding tools, and Eve mentioned this also, I think, in what we call Australia now, in the song lines and the dreaming that was involved in that, or the migratory paths of Zuni and other indigenous people, of any people, moving and thirsting, searching for that resource, and it becoming a wisdom that then can be passed along and shared, in the lived stories and the insights from those, and also as a directional tool, so that those following in the path, or finding their own way, can look towards those ancestral stories and the lineage of relating with a place, or relating with new places, and kind of what to look out for, and what to listen for, and what to find your way through and with. And for me, there's a grief in that, there's in the loss of that. Just as the developments, sprawl over, deforested areas, there is something that's lost that we are called to remember into, and to create together again. Um, when Jim was pointing out those drawings on the rock in the film, he makes a joke about selfies being the popular way now. And I think, without traversing too much into to the unknown for me of, AI and tech assisted areas of life, just recognizing the prevalence of digital life, of technology, and just the different life ways that have come at this stage of industrialization, and how they often serve this, what I see as a way of kind of dislocating ourselves, of kind of removing the power and the connection that we have in place. But now, as we grow awareness around it, we can create those stories together. We can look back to the myths that have carried us to this point, and we can be active myth makers together. I think about mythology as the story and the logic, of the intuitive, of the spiritual, of the dream world, of the abstract and unformed and unknown. And then these ways that we can measure and scale and track, and, plot our ways through life and through the world and with the world. And so if that's what's within, the power of myth, and song and story and maps are all tools for myth telling and myth making, again, I just bring us into the position of cartographers into how we're making meaning with life through the ways that we're orienting ourselves to place, or finding our ways to water, or holding out hope for relief to come, or for connection to be there in the moments when we're looking for it. And then to extend care towards the future, towards those who may be looking for those resources, for that connection in the days to come. In the community space yesterday, one of our guests was talking about, attention as a way of offering care. And if we look at these processes and practices as a devotion of attention, within it is a devotion of care. And then orienting to who we're holding in that circle of care, I think, is a great way to be mindful of the limitations of our perspectives, and to genuinely cultivate inclusive pathways that we can coexist through. Serves the pivot well. I'm going to put another link into the chat, and even share my screen. To show you all this site, Queering the Map. There we go. Sorry. So Queering the Map is a community-generated mapping project, and it digitally chronicles queer experience in relation to physical space. And by doing this, focus on one area here. It's my multitasking skills are being tested. So community members can, add a story to the map. And it lives together in an archive here on this site to preserve our histories and the unfolding realities that happen around the world. I was hoping to be able to navigate this with more ease. Previous times I've viewed this map, it's very evident how the the stories will pop up visibly. So again, I apologize for my. Oh, okay, that explains it. Thank you, Barnabas. The site's been down for about a week. Wow, how about that? Okay, all right. That is very sad. There we go. This is what I'm used to seeing. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Wow. I'm really struck by that. This is how the map is typically filled with stories from around the world. In places where queerness has different stakes in people's lives. Barnabas, thanks for naming the sadness there, because I really feel that right now. Feels like a tremendous loss. I'm sure there are ways to access the stories in other places, but the interactive nature of this resource, to me, really it brings the the edge of aliveness forward. I'll stop sharing again. We're co-creating these stories and bringing our lives into visibility, all of us, every day. And with that, that's how we're creating this, our mythos for the future. That's a way that we're extending care into the future, is by affirming ourselves and affirming each other right here where we are. Wow. So Barnabas, would you be interested either in the chat or unmuting yourself, maybe to share a bit about your familiarity with this resource, to keep me from monologuing?
Yeah, sure. It is really sad. So I came about and found this site maybe a year or so ago and went back and found locations even where I went to college and felt such an interesting experience of feeling not alone because other people in the spaces that I had been at, and it's not according to time, it's just according to place. You don't know when people have put these logs about love or experience or misconnection or fear onto the map, and felt so much belonging just from navigating through streets that I had walked when I was in college or in the city that I'm in now. But then also in October and November, watching queer Palestinians mark their own stories as testimonies against being pinkwashed away, and saying, we're here. And so I feel a lot of grief when I found out earlier that it was down. Um, and I hope that these stories are still kept somewhere because there are so many stories to see.
Thank you for sharing and helping us remember together. Bringing our voices and letting the stories live through our experiences, when the websites go down. Well, and thank you also for adding, a link to their Twitter X page. I also hope it comes back online. Yeah, personally, I am honestly feeling a bit impacted by that news. I think this resource held so much for me without me even realizing it. Just recognizing the ways that people can bring their story forward, even in environments and places and social settings and worldviews where their experience is punishable by death. Um, and so many queer people lose their relationship with the lands that raised them when they need to leave out of refuge, as a seeking safety elsewhere in the world. I think the term safe spaces is a risky one, ironically. And it's so much more about building trust together. And when I see the other people's courageous stories coming forward or the vulnerability, knowing the risks of isolation, of extraction from our own families, from our own lineages, from our own lands, um, because of this, because of the essence of who we are and how we live that identity. Um, Being with that courage encourages it in me. Um, and so maybe, it's just time for us to carry this forward in a new way. And I'm going to share a bit about the narrative cartography project that I have been nurturing for a few years. It's something that I can always tell I'm like veering away from my own path when I'm not in the practice of it as much as I talk about it. And unfortunately, right now, that's the case. I'm not in the practice of narrative cartography as much as I'm talking about it. But I'll just consider that an invitation to get into the play of it a little bit more. So are y'all interested in hearing about ways to make maps more in your lives, to connect with place in a different way? Um, it's something that it's pretty simple and straightforward for some. It's an experience that's people have taken a look at it and said, oh, I do that all the time, just in my own mind. So I welcome all experiences here. This may not be novel, but it's something that's really supportive for me, especially when I'm getting all tangled up in my own thoughts or distractions or, off put by difficult emotions. It's something that is really centering and grounding for me. And please excuse the linear format here. My next challenge is to queer the layout a bit. So I'll let you know when that version's ready to come out. So the Wayfinding Workbook, as I mentioned, it's something that you can practice in one place and journey through your awareness, or it's something that you can carry with you as you traverse through a place. And I encourage people to start with an intention or a question. Earlier, we talked about, or I talked about the identities that can inform the context of a map. So that could be one, centering a particular identity, holding a question, or bringing, a strong emotion or experience to the altar of ecology, as I like to say. So you start with that. You can mark it down if you wish. And then as you continue through time, you follow impulse as you go and make notes at each of these plot points. So rather than a plot point being defined at, I'm at 50th and Market Street, I'm at this corner, or I'm at this stoplight, or I'm at the library, and connecting with an object in place. These plot points are defined from your internal impulse. So let's say you're going out for a walk. You're going out to move through space in some way. And you come across a burl in the side of the tree and you just can't take your eyes off of it. There's something that's captivating you. There's some salience there and you don't quite know what it is. No need to overthink it. No need to define it. No need to know. Just take that as a flag to bring some awareness to all the different things that are happening for you in that moment. And you can follow these prompts as a guide. So you'll see that there are suggestions here for, the 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. There's also an invitation to bring awareness and make note of your felt sense. I feel heavy in my feet. I feel light on my feet. There's a monkey on my back. Figurative language encouraged and welcome. There's a whale in my belly. I feel watery. What is your felt sense? How are you occupying your body, and what, perhaps figurative or metaphorical language is there? Making note of the emotions that you notice in that moment. We all have a different capacity for tracking and noticing emotions. And so it is, sorry, it's like, am I sharing screen or not? Okay, I'm sharing screen. I think I see it. Are you all seeing the screen there? Okay, all right, thanks. We all have different capacities for noticing and being with emotions. So sometimes it can be very intimidating just to cast a gaze into it. But if you've got the gumption, I say go for it and write down the emotion that you're noticing in yourself. Maybe there are many. And the same with thoughts. If your thoughts are looping, if your thoughts are being drawn towards a particular question or problem, or if you really want to know the story behind this burl in the tree. But just let yourself rest in the noticing. There's a spot here where you can draw a sketch, make any other notes, and before you know it, it's time to move on and continue moving through time and space. As I mentioned, you can also hold this you can also hold this as a sit spot exercise. So if you're choosing to do this in a solitary place, then you'll just continue to follow your awareness in what you're noticing, and let your awareness, carry you down the path of time. And I like to encourage folks to let go of meaning making as you go through this process. This is really like a data collection stage of the project. So once you've gathered all this information in a selected period of time, or in a selected area of space, I'll stop sharing for a second. Then you go back to the notes that you took, maybe take a breath, drink some water, have a snack, and go back with a colored pencil, a highlighter, or a bold pen, and go back through each plot point and just circle or underline what still has energy for you. What still is, you feel an aliveness connected to. It might be that burl in the tree. It might be the memory that just, intruded its way into your thoughts, and the emotions that are associated with it. It might be the dream that you had that just came forward for you when you looked out at the view, expanding your perspective, across the landscape. And you make note of all these things that are still alive, that are still relevant, that are salient to you. And that will inform the scale that they hold when you relay that onto a bird's eye view map, um, which is the second part of the process. So you can come back to it at another time, or add it on to your time in the sit spot or your time out on the walk. And when you are creating the map, you'll start first with these plot points. So marking on a page, you know, how these moments exist in proximity to one another. And again, I think it's really important to de-emphasize like scale or some sense of objectivity of how these places are in relationship to each other. It's the whole I walked uphill both ways to school in the snow. It's like sometimes the experience of something lives in us in a different way than the land might tell. And so this format is a way that we can honor the lived experience that we're bringing, into our relationship with land. So you'll set those plot points, in proximity on a piece of paper. And you also might find that that's where, if you had a really big experience with that burl, then the burl may take up the most area on the page. And what I next like to invite people to do is to weave together the words that carried the aliveness. So this is where the narrative part of the cartography comes in. Where you're piecing together different words or aspects of experience or narratives from each of the plot points. So it might be that the scent of lavender accompanied the vista when the dream of your grandmother came through. And so how are those experiences linked? Because they were all relatively simultaneous in your own awareness and attention. So how can those be, woven together into one moment, into one part of your experience? And so with that, each plot point then begins to have its own narrative. And sometimes, not every time, but most times, I'll notice that the things that are speaking to me from each plot point communicate directly to the intention or the question that I set out with. This is like the miraculous oracle of nature, of being with the cosmos, where we can put something out there and feel that relational callback and receive something, in communication with our world and beyond and beyond. So I find that's a cherry on top of this process is kind of what can I get from this that will feed back into this initial question or intention that I'm holding. And then from that point, this is where the map really expands into the creative perspective and capacity of the cartographer. And in mentioning that, I'm going to share a few of the maps that I have created, just to give you all a sense of, my version of this. So this is actually a painting I created that inspired the workbook. I made this more intuitively. I was, living off grid for about 5 weeks. And when I returned home, I wanted to integrate my experience in some way. And so I went through my journals and pulled out the prose that I'd created there, and began to lay it into my memories of the land. And and with that, I found that my journey in that time was held and began to reveal things to me. And I showed this to some folks that I was with during that experience off grid, and and they saw themselves, in the riverside, or they remembered the times that we shared around the fire, or that gnarly oak tree up on the hill. And they too were able to see themselves and their identities reflected in the way that this map, or this landscape portrayed. But as you'll notice, this is very much not to scale. There is very much that's left out. And there's also so much that is centered in this experience of the story alive in this narrative cartography. Later on, after developing the workbook, I practiced it in my old neighborhood from when I lived in the city of San Francisco. And this is a home where I went through a big grief of uncoupling with my ex. And this was my first time back to that neighborhood, since we had gone our separate ways. And so there was this medicinal quality to that visit because I was really going back for closure to engage with the place in a particular way that would honor the times that I lived there, honor that chapter of my life, honor that history, and also be a catharsis for moving forward in my life. And I know the linearity of this of this map. I know the path that I walked when I was making it, but it conveys something else, I think, to those who were not the map maker here. I'm curious of how it disrupts a two-dimensional way of seeing and relating to place because of how these winding roads and twisted branches are portrayed. And then I challenged myself to go a bit further and abstract myself from the place even more. And so I returned to the map and was relating more to my sensory experience with the form and the other life that was there. I took my story out of it and just focused um, on the details that were still speaking to me, which I think communicates the iterative process of relating to place, of communicating with an experience, with land, and conveying that into a map or another storied tool. And I'll stop the share there. So if y'all are interested, I can include a PDF in the chat so that you can, thanks, Rachel. If you're interested in taking this format out and exploring it on your own, I'm also going to put my email address in the chat because I'd love to hear about if you do carry on with this experience in some way. Robin, you getting to know the lands of northern New Jersey or taking it back to the lands that raised you. I'd love to hear more about your experiences and possibly, take the cue from queering the map and see how our stories all live alongside each other in all the ways that we're creating mythos in our day-to-day lives. So that concludes what I have to share with y'all today. Again, I'd like to open up the floor for any other questions or comments and reflections here. Thanks so much for these appreciations and yeah, just for everyone's contributions in the conversation.
Did you include the PDF?
Oh, thank you. I'll add that PDF here now.
Shmee, I saw Meg raise a hand, I believe, too. I don't know if Meg wants to.
Yeah, please come on in.
Yes, sorry if there's wind. I'll share with you my map of where I am outside right now.
Oh my goodness.
Just wanted to give you just so much appreciation for sharing your work and sharing your art. And I've been reflecting on when I first learned about maps, the practice of map making in general was, when I was in elementary school and thinking about how commerce driven those maps were, and thinking about the first historical maps, at least that I've been aware of, how how they were linked to trade routes, and just thinking about, even as you were bringing in earlier about Google Maps, and thinking about how that too is so directly tied to commerce and to capitalism, and just really appreciating this other way of map making that is just so different, and feels like it's so tied to joy and emotion and human experience. So just really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meg. It's a whole other conversation that you're sparking in me around, around commerce, and exchange, and the traumas that are associated with that, the exchange of resource that's associated with that. Um, I'm reminded to in the chat for artist Connie Zhang, who does these incredible mixed media paintings. And one project has traced the journey of seeds around the world, whether slave trade or through other types of commerce. And it's really incredible to see the ways that our lives intermix and mingle.
Wow.
I too am speechless at it all sometimes.
I just want to say that I often say about myself that I can't draw stick figures, meaning I can't draw anything. But I'm very inspired, Shmee. First of all, by the form, I'll have to see if I can do that, but also thinking about maps in a very different way. And really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Robin. I'm
Wondering
so
if
glad to hear of the impact.
if there's a possibility of doing a map of my mind. Scary, but anyway.
I
Okay.
know some of these are courageous journeys indeed. And then certainly a sacred one. Yeah, I've seen maps of, where someone will do a trace outline of their physical form. And then, where do memories or where do stories live? Where are they felt in a somatic way? How is the body a map? All right, Meg, I think you sparked a second chapter of this conversation. And again, I've added my email address into the chat. So if anyone has future musings, I'd love to, be invited into what you're thinking. Please share any maps that you create of your mind or otherwise. Thank you so much for receiving this conversation and for all your engagement. Thank you, Charlie and Elizabeth. Yeah, and just wishing you all many blessings and happy trails till we meet again.
Thank you, Shmee. Thank you so much.
Many blessings.
Many blessings.